Hey, everybody. If you're with us live today, thanks so much for joining. If you're watching on demand, thanks for joining us that way as well. And even though we're going to have a little bit of discussion here live, I hope that if you have thoughts, you'll drop those in the comments or send me a DM or something to keep this conversation going. Today, we're going to have a conversation about ransomware, which is something we've talked about before. We're going to talk about it again because it's a very important topic that's on the minds of almost everybody in IT today, even if you're not solely a security professional. If you're in IT in any sort of capacity, you're probably thinking about ransomware. So Scott and I are going to talk about that today. And if you're watching live, we'd love your comments too and bring you in as to be a part of the conversation. So let me set up the conversation by sharing a couple of ransomware stats, which I don't think anybody probably needs, but at the same time, I think it's helpful just to help us all remember why this is so important. So these are some recent stats about ransomware that I found interesting. 82.6% of US organizations have been victims of one or more successful cyber attacks. So that may not be ransomware necessarily, but some sort of compromise.
That is actually kind of mind-blowing, Jim.
That is startling. That's scary. And you know, I was going to get to this later, but I'll just mention it now. What's even scarier about that is the numbers that we have publicly available about security compromise are only those who were willing to report that. And I think it's safe to say there's probably some percentage of organizations compromised that we'll never know about because they don't come public with that information.
Or whoever answered the survey didn't know or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, 82.6% plus there might be more is insane. This is crazy. Okay, here's some more. The average cost of downtime as it relates to the ransomware amount is 24x, meaning according to this stat, if you don't pay the ransom, the cost that you wound up incurring in downtime was 24x that what they were demanding in ransom, which says a lot about why people may end up paying.
Well, and that's one of the things that's really a big. Let's talk about that for just a second. One of the controversies in all of this is there's twofold. One is, should you pay the ransom? And there's people that say absolutely not. All you're doing is incentivizing the bad guys. And other people say, well, there's a return on investment analysis that has to be done for this reason. And there's another line of thinking that basically says that people should be required to report to some agency if they've paid a ransom or whatever, right? So there's a lot of discussion going on in the market or in the field right now about whether you should and whether if you do or don't, if that should be a reportable event to someone. So that's kind of interesting as well.
I think it's all an interesting discussion. I think it's really easy to say, well, philosophically, you shouldn't pay the ransom. And
it's easy to say that
as an armchair
super
quarterback.
Easy.
Yeah, like that's really easy to say as an armchair CEO. But when it may be the difference between your company continues to exist and doesn't, the calculus about whether or not we should pay the bad guys is totally different.
Absolutely.
So, all right, here's another one. 200 million ransomware attacks in the first 9 months of 2020. This comes from SonicWall. So they observed 200 million ransomware attacks.
How do you even see 200 million ransom? I mean, is that users?
I'd love to know how that was calculated. Either way, it's a huge number.
That feels like one of those. That feels like a stat that requires a little bit of unpacking. I would love to learn more about.
Yeah, we should dig more into it. So the stat comes from SonicWall. I suppose you could say they've identified the source of attackers, and they're saying these attackers came after 200 million different.
Or there were that many attempts.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
All right, last one. $7.5 billion is, according to this research, $7.5 billion, the cumulative cost of ransomware attacks in 2019. And we know that's only growing. So 2 years back, the cumulative cost of those that were reported, again, there's probably more we don't know about, but of those that were reported, $7.5 billion.
And that feels low now, but it's based on what happened throughout 2020.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And 2021. Yeah, I mean, it's a staggering number. I mean, it's one of the things that's interesting about hearing things like about stimulus bills and all this other stuff that's happening politically is the term billions we've become numb to it.
Mm-hmm.
But 7.5 billion that's a ton of money.
That's a chunk of change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
I could
that
probably retire on that, James.
I would. I mean, I'd have to go back to the spreadsheet, but I think I could. Um, that speaks to why this is not going away and why we need to keep addressing this over and over. We keep streaming about this because it's such an important topic, and it's such an important topic because it's so lucrative to bad guys. Bad guys made $7.5 billion.
Yeah.
So they're going to keep doing that. That's a fact.
And this is one of the reasons why everybody and their brother is talking about ransomware right now, and will be for the foreseeable future. I mean, if this conversation isn't taking place in boardrooms around the world, organizations are asleep at the wheel, because I'd be willing to bet that every organization has had at least an attempt, even if that's just as simple as a phishing attempt.
Right.
And it's just a matter of serendipity that they haven't been, or good planning, because obviously if you train your people well and you've got good systems in place, you can protect yourself. But there's always that one slip up that could happen.
Yep.
And that's all it takes.
And so when that slip up happens and an organization is compromised, it appears that bad guys are smart, and they're looking at how big is this organization, what is their impact, and setting the ransom based on both, what they think the company is capable of paying. And we've read some funny stories about where they're wildly off on that. I have seen threads where people are talking about they were infected and they were like, they're asking for a couple $1 million in ransom, and like, we haven't done that in revenue in the last couple of years. Like, it would be impossible.
Right.
So sometimes they're off, but they're trying to do the math. What is the most I could squeeze out of these folks? And what is the impact of this going to force them into? And they seem to set that largely based on the size of the organization. So I've got a couple other figures here. Large organizations, I don't know what the cutoff for that is. Maybe that's federal census data or something, but large organizations routinely report paying ransoms in the millions of dollars or more. Those that provide software to other providers, meaning, I won't call them out, but like that one that happened this year where their agents were running in everybody else's stuff. And the other one like that, there were 2 cases of that this year that were big news. They see ransom demands in the tens of millions of dollars, and even small businesses may pay ransoms of tens of thousands of dollars. And again,
that includes even things like school districts and healthcare organizations. I mean,
right, where $10,000 would be really hard to come by.
Yeah, and it really messes things up.
Yeah.
We think about those. I want to go back to the one about where we see essentially what are supply chain type attacks, right? Those are the holy grail, man. For a ransom attack, which is unfortunate in a number of instances, but like if you can get into that stream and you can attack someone that has thousands of customers, I mean, you've just basically scaled up your ransomware operation in a way that would be impossible to do in organization by organization. I'm not trying to provide business advice to these people, but wow, right. That's one of the reasons why this is becoming such an area of interest for attackers, because it's a scaling opportunity, which is not good for us, but for them it's lucrative.
In the latter of those 2 cases, I was reading that they were actually trying to double dip. So there's a ransom demand on the software provider, but then on their clients who were impacted, there was a ransom demand there as well. They're trying to get it from both of them.
Wow. I believe it. I didn't see that article, but I totally believe that would, why not? I mean,
yeah, right.
Wow.
So I already pointed this out, but we'll mention it again. That is only those that we know about. There's probably more. And I think there's one more thing to point out about these figures, which is those factors are basically the hard costs. That doesn't even factor in the soft costs of, downtime, lost opportunity, even things like morale. I mean, there are significant costs that extend beyond the capital that leaves your bank account to pay the ransom or otherwise. There's significant soft costs. Recovery time, lost time that you could have been doing business that you spent just trying to get back up and running. All this stuff makes it cost even more than these numbers made it sound like.
And this is one of the reasons why organizations, when I talk about people being, this being a boardroom discussion, the first question is, how at risk are we? I mean, that's where you're going to hear the CISO or whoever's responsible for security in the organization is going to get, that's the first question they're going to hear from the board is, what's our risk? And right. I think that brings us to our next discussion.
Yeah, so we're going to share something that we've recently learned about that I personally believe will be hugely helpful in this discussion. But let's continue setting the stage there. I want to like, not role play, but like describe this scenario a little bit more, because I think people will really appreciate this. It probably has happened to you, or you've seen it happening in your organization. Here's what happens. There's big news, like we were just talking about, those supply chain attacks, or, the Colonial Pipeline thing, or something big. And so somebody in the organization who has a lot of responsibility and a lot to lose if things are compromised comes in and says, hey, folks, are we protected against this? Could we be compromised? That's not going to be us next, is it? And the people who report to that person then need to go and sort of develop the collateral and the substance that says, yeah, we've thought about this. We have done what we know we can do to protect ourselves, and we believe we're ready to respond to a threat. And they come back with this giant pile of information that's like, reports spit out of software and spreadsheets and, I don't know, support tickets and all this stuff. And they say, look at all this stuff we did. There's 100 pages worth of stuff we did here. So we're pretty sure that we're protected. And the person who asked the question is probably looking at this pile of stuff going, oh my gosh, that's a ton of stuff. But I have no idea what any of this means.
There's no context at all.
I don't know if that means we're protected or not. I know it's a lot of stuff, but so what? Could be a lot of the wrong stuff. And so the question that a lot of organizations and leaders in those organizations are trying to figure out right now is, are we protected sufficiently? And if not, where are the gaps? Because this 100-page pile of documentation tells me some things that are done. What it does not tell me is what gaps may I still have? Where am I exposed? Where am I weak? And if whoever was pulling together that data doesn't know enough to parse that out for them, or there's not the organizational awareness to say, oh yeah, we covered it from that angle, but what about from this angle? Then we don't know. And so what would be really useful, and what we're going to share with you today, is a sort of third-party tool that would answer that question to the best of our ability collectively as an industry right now. So our friends over at Haiku are spearheading an effort to launch a tool that does just that. It is a survey that sucks in information, then delivers what's called your R score. And that R score is short for ransomware preparedness score, I think. I might be saying that wrong, but basically the R score says, on a scale of 0 to 1,000, how prepared are you to weather a ransomware attack? And what is the likelihood that you're going to escape unscathed? And that's your R score. And in theory, you can take the output of this tool and say, okay, today we got a 700. We'll make this improvement, this improvement, this improvement. And by next month, we want to score a 800. And the goal always being a perfect score of 1,000, which I'm not sure if it's possible to get, but continuing to increase your score, which says, according to all of the variables in the R score algorithm, we are XYZ prepared to handle a ransomware attack. So Scott, you spent a lot of years as a CIO. Is the output of something like this something that you would have appreciated and found valuable?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not going to be like, the end all be all, but it's going to be a place to start at least. I think this is something, what I like about this is it's going to compare me to others, which to a point is good. I think the twin organizations say, okay, as long as we're as good as our competitor, then that's all that's matter. That's all that matters. But this,
be lazy.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. This will give me a place to basically say, where do I have weakness? And it also provides a contextual level playing field. So when we have that boardroom discussion and we say our R score is 736, and here's the specific areas that we can provide improvement, Yes, I think that gives me a sort of a roadmap to making it better. And I mean, honestly, there's nothing else like it out there right now, and it provides a good way to start to wrap your hands around what is actually an incredibly complex thing to fix. People think about ransomware as just, well, just don't have phishing emails. I mean, I think most people understand at this point that it's more beyond that. But they still think in that terms. If I can just block phishing emails, I don't have to worry about it. Well, it's not, because there's all of your backup infrastructure that you have to think about. There's what's happening on my identity management side of things. There's all kinds of places where there's potential susceptibility to falling victim to an attack that people don't think about. And the nice thing, what I like about our score is it makes people start thinking about this more broadly. Now, I think this is going to be especially useful for smaller and medium-sized organizations. Larger organizations probably have more dedicated security personnel that look at all of this stuff. Small and mid-sized organizations often don't. It's part of someone's job, so it doesn't get a full-time, head. And so it's important to have something that can help them begin to really wrap their brains around, holy cow, this is actually a big deal.
Yeah. And we're going to dive into some of the facets of the score and how it's calculated, just to help illustrate some of the things you should be thinking about when it comes to ransomware. But quick clarification, you said that it will compare you to your peers. My understanding is that's a roadmap feature that's coming.
Oh,
today.
You're right.
Today it'll give you the score. It would be on you to get with your peer and compare your scores with each other. But in the future, I think there's certainly the framework there where the developers could say, we have this. Obviously, they're going to be very careful about and being careful with this sensitive stuff. But they could collect some very generic stuff about just what industry are you in. That doesn't give away too much, and then compare against others who are taking the survey in that industry. That would be, like you said, really helpful as one data point. As long as you don't use it as an opportunity to be lazy, we're that much better.
Do the minimum you need to do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at it real quick, and we can look at some of the things that are being asked here and some of the main tenets of the R score, and we can talk about how those things are important. So there are, I believe, 5 different main sections here. They say that you should be able to complete this assessment in 15 minutes if you have in your head the answers to these questions, which I think, again, speaks to your point about maybe smaller organizations especially benefiting from this, because the person taking this may actually have the answer to all these questions. The bigger the organization, the more likely it's going to take 10 people to fill out this survey. But even in that case, I think it would be useful. It just might take a little longer. But so the first thing is about backup processes, and the questions being asked are really saying, how well do your backup processes as they exist today align with what you want to deliver in terms of availability? So they ask some specific questions here about just, how are you doing that? Are they air gapped? RPOs aligned with business RPOs, stuff like that. And that's really the foundation of this thing, right? Based on the stats we were talking about before, you should probably assume that at some point you're going to be compromised. I think everybody who's thinking about this stuff is going to do everything they can to try and keep that from happening. But the reality is it's very likely that at some point you're going to be compromised. And so you want to have a good set of backups. This is the foundation of your opportunity to recover and not pay the ransom. And we know now that even in cases where you pay the ransom, you may need to be able to recover. It may not be either or, it may be both and.
I think among a lot of the stories I've read, it's both and at this point in a lot of cases. Like, something's encrypted, the bad guys are not necessarily going to be able to understand exactly what actually happened once it was out of their control. And so, yeah, if you don't have both, sometimes even paying the ransom is not going to be all that helpful.
Yeah. So backup processes, and then here, of course, I think this was implied, so I didn't say it, but when you get to the end of completing the survey, you get the score, but also a really helpful report that highlights the things that are, low-hanging fruit for improving your score. So if you say here on this backup processes piece of the survey that, our RPOs are in fact not at all aligned with our infrastructure RPOs, are not aligned with our business RPOs, then it's going to call that out, and that's something that you can go and work on. So foundational stuff here. Next page, backup infrastructure. So the question is, do you have in place what you would need to do to make those backup processes work correctly, and to make all of the recovery processes that you're going to end up calling on work correctly as well? Because we'll probably get into this a little more on one of the future tenets, but backup is actually it's the most foundational piece, I guess, but not the most critical piece. The most critical piece is the restore. If you have great backups and your backups are tested and validated and everything is fantastic, but the restore goes wrong,
your backups don't matter.
It was all worthless.
And that's always been, it's amazing. We've been preaching that for decades, and it's still amazing to me that people don't test backups, and it's still so prevalent. It's almost disheartening.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things that is, it's hard to continuously prioritize over time when there is no incident that validates how important that is. If you go a decade and have no major failure where the recovery matters, you start to go, do I really need to have this much resources dedicated to that? Whether that's people time or, at this point, there's really good software that'll basically automate a ton of this testing for you. There's good options. The one that comes to mind, I'm not mentioning him for any reason other than it came to mind, is Veeam's Sure Backup feature. Will basically, take your backups, restore them, boot them, make sure that everything comes back online. You can have scripts run that make sure the application is running. I mean, you can test the whole thing automatically now. Of course, that's expensive. So it goes back to what I'm saying about the resources. You say, man, we've been spending all this money on this recovery testing and nothing's happened. Do we really need to keep spending all this money? So I get it. I get why.
Yeah.
And it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse, but yeah, the insurance the premium starts to feel expensive when you never end up making a claim.
Yeah.
So anyway, backup infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure to meet the RPOs and RTOs? And, as the environment changes, this is something that you have to constantly revisit, because you may have things like, growing number of applications or infrastructure devices that need to be backed up. And if the backup infrastructure isn't kept up to date in sync with that, you might wind up with, say, more data to back up than you can back up in your backup window, just as one example. So it's important to constantly revisit this. Is the data in transit encrypted? That's a good question. Some of this probably is also looking at, what's going to happen in the event of a breach. So let's say you have good backups, but really smart ransomware gets in and starts encrypting your stuff. At this point, all of the professional bad guys know the first line of defense you have is your backup. So the first thing they're going to do is go try and wipe out your backups. They're going to try and encrypt your backups as well. They're going to cut off access to your backup repository. They're going to delete your shadow copies. They're going to make it impossible to get at your backups in every way they know how. And so some of this is probably looking at how secured is your backup infrastructure from your primary infrastructure, such that you're still able to use it even when the primary infrastructure is compromised. Next one.
These are good questions. I mean, so many of these things, again, are people thinking about all this stuff?
No, and that's why I think this thing is so beautiful, is, as you mentioned, this is an extremely broad thing to look at. And there's so many questions. And it's not necessarily even ignorance or naivety that get people here. It's just the breadth of the thing. And when you get tunnel vision on backups and forget to be thinking about security and networking, or whatever, you can miss stuff just because it's so broad. And so what I love about this tool is it helps surface the breadth of questions you should be thinking about, and then you can take a look at where was I not paying enough attention. And of course, it can also be ignorance. It can be that you don't know what you don't know. And so if that's the case for you, that's the other thing here, is the report surfaces things you didn't even know you should be thinking about that now you can go and think about.
The other thing I think this does, especially for smaller organizations, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, it may push them to say, you know what, we don't know. And let's go get an MSP or a partner that does, and helps everyone do better. Because as a smaller organization, people are wearing so many hats that it's just not possible to stay on top of everything.
Yep.
And it might push them to say, this is too hard, I need to go get help.
That's a good opportunity to mention that, as I understand it, if you would like some more input on this R score, you can actually reach out to Haiku, who's kind of leading this initiative, and some of their ransomware recovery experts will go over this with you and give you an even deeper report on how you can do better here. So if you're in that case that Scott's describing, where you may recognize that you need some help, Haiku would be a good place to start, because they built the report. They understand how it works. They understand why each item that's there is there. And they can help you start thinking through how to remedy some of this stuff. So security networking obviously is MFA in place in the backup infrastructure. That's interesting. That seems, see, it just did it for me. Like, that's a duh when I read it there. I really never would have thought about, do I need some sort of multi-factor authentication to get to my backups? I've never even seen that done, actually. But
yeah, just for backups, I haven't either. For other things, yeah.
But I mean, as I read it right
sense
here, I'm like, wow, yeah, that's a really good idea. I should definitely be doing that. Is the backup infrastructure in a segmented network? I think most people who are reading this would go, yeah, that's a good idea. In practice, I think it's done a lot less often than people would like to admit.
I would agree with that.
What is the visibility of your backup targets? Yeah, so how separated are they from the primary?
What are the options there?
Let's see.
Yeah. Choose something else just to make it interesting when we see the actual score at the end.
Oh, sure. They are, let's say, public network air-gapped. What does that mean? They're not accessible from the internet. we're going to get smacked for that. Okay. Continue. Restoration assurance. So this is what I was talking about earlier. All of the previous stuff is for naught if you can't restore. So are you testing it? Are you validating that the stuff is good? How often are you validating that it's good? So on and so forth. So,
okay.
And then the last piece is disaster recovery. And as I pointed out earlier, the whole being able to restore at all thing is important, but what's also important is business continuity in the interim. How quickly are you able to get back up and running, and to what extent?
Yeah, the key thing here is that our score is not just ransomware prevention, it's ransomware recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you want to be able to prevent it, but the whole point is, what's the impact if I get hit?
Let's see. We do this often, and is there a DR site on a different location? Cold.
Yeah.
And is there public cloud that's used to test? Sure. Okay. Submit.
All right. So this organization is hurting.
I didn't answer anything on the first couple of pages, so that's not fair. But yeah, in this case, there is what you would call lots of opportunity for improvement. And what's great about this is you can submit your industry here, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about maybe in the future submitting or being able to provide you with some very generic comparison with your peers. And then they'll send you a report. So let me see if I can get it to do that here. I'm a farmer. Oh, print your results. Oh,
that works.
Actually going to print my results. Okay.
Can you, yeah, there you go.
So basically what you see here is your answer, the question, and then an explanation of why the question is being asked. So what you would be able to do with this report, which is 9 pages. So it's not massive, but there's a little description of each, which is going to tell you basically where to go look next and start digging deeper. So, you know, if you got dinged on a particular score, the report tells you why and where you should start looking to get better here. So yeah, very cool tool. I'm really excited that Haiku built this. And to give credit where credit's due, let me go back to the homepage. They had a couple partners in this. And so you may ask, like, well, what is Haiku's authority when it comes to ransomware, and why are they the ones who should be giving me the answers? At the beginning, they built this with 2 partners. Basically, as I understand the 2 partners, it's a VAR that has a lot of expertise in this space, and Mandiant, which is the consulting arm of FireEye, like security people. This is what they do.
I think that the key thing here, one of the things that we need to stress is this is not a lead generation tool for these folks. They are not collecting your personal information, but they are obviously trying to become an authority, trying to demonstrate their authoritative credentials on this. So that's really important. This is a tool that they really want to be as agnostic as they can make it, and still, so meet their business requirements. Is the sense I get. What are your thoughts, James?
The marketer in me is like, I could hug you for this. This is brilliant, because you don't have to put in any contact information. You're not going to get a phone call from Haiku after you use this tool. It is genuinely helpful. And it may turn out that in the long run, you found that so helpful that you'd like to speak with Haiku about how they could help. And that's obviously a possible outcome for them here, but they're not pushing that in any way, which I love. That's, we've said for a long time, we believe that education produces results. And when people trust you and you're an authority, then they want your help. And I love this. So I'm checking my notes here to see if there's anything else I wanted to call out before we wrap up. We're about out of time here. Backup recovery. So I mentioned this once, but I'll mention it again. They, I think, say right on the website copy, but they're saying it takes 15 minutes to fill this thing out. And you just saw how many questions there were there. If you're in a position in the organization where you know the answers to those questions, I think it could take you less than 15 minutes. But let's just say you weren't. I mean, you could get together with a couple of your colleagues that, between you would have the answers, and you could have a solid assessment done in an hour to get some idea where you stand. And then if you need to dig deeper, you can call Haiku and they'll go over it with you and help you dig even deeper. So
yeah, and again, this goes back to the other piece we're talking about, which is being able to demonstrate also improvement over time. If you take it today and there's a whole bunch of areas that are identified for improvement, you take those steps, take the thing again, and you show improvement. It's also important to note this will not be a static site. It's fully expected that Haiku and their partners are going to do a V2, V3, V4, and they're going to continue to refine this based on new data, expanding the potential for helping you understand where there might be other adjacent things you need to be thinking about. So what you see today and what you see next year will probably be a little bit different, which is good.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any guarantee of this, but I think they're definitely open to other partnerships. So if there's, say, a fourth and fifth company that have a little bit different angle on ransomware preparedness, they could potentially be brought into the fold here to make the assessment even more rich. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I'm excited to see what this looks like this time next year. So I think it'll be really cool. So we're out of time here. It's been a really fun chat for me about ransomware. I hope this has been useful for you. If you have thoughts, especially if you're watching on demand, about ransomware and about being prepared, I'd like to have further discussion about this in the comments, so drop those there. One parting thought, we have an event coming up in a couple weeks called Transforming Data Protection, DRaaS, and Disaster Recovery Capabilities. That is a megacast, I believe. Lots of great Actual Tech Media partners on that event presenting about how you can do better about this same sort of stuff that we're talking about. So we'd love to have you join us for that event. You can find the registration for that over at events.actualtechmedia.com if you want to get signed up for that, or any of the other gazillion events that we have going on in September.
While we're talking about ransomware events, an October event that's critical for people to understand, we don't actually have a link to it right now, is we're having a full summit around nothing but ransomware. And we're going to have a huge lineup of vendors to talk to you about all things ransomware. And that's on October 20th, I believe. And it's one of our virtual summit events, our larger premier events. And it's going to be fantastic for people who are, and there'll also be a special announcement from Actual Tech Media on that event too. So
it's going to be a big day. So we hope you'll join us there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Hope you have a great week.
Thank you.